I'm going to be discussing a touchy topic. I'll be discussing the favorite way that the devil discredits God's man from the ministry. I just found out that Brent has been ordained as pastor at Church of Gail, and I'm very proud of him. But already, the devil's people are trying to discredit him, claiming that he is not qualified to be in the ministry because he's committed sexual sins. Apparently, they're alleging that he is really the wife of Lori McBride, and that for him to have a relationship with me is some sort of adultery. Let me go into some Bible passages about the laws for marriage. Let's read. First of all, I would like to say that I do believe that the laws for marriage are slightly different under the law, under Jewish law, and under grace. Right now we are in the church age, so the laws for marriage that apply to us would be the laws that are written by the Apostle Paul. Though you can go to the Old Testament to get principles that God uses in judging in the marriage relationship. But let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. The only reason I'm discussing this is because I'm not trying to be a preacher. The Lord wants me to make videos about how God works in my life. And I just want to share with you how I came to have peace about my relationship with Brent Spiner, because I was conflicted in the 1990s about being in love with him when I was married. And that's why I didn't go to him. So I'm going to share with you how I came to have peace about it, and how I even eventually came to the conclusion that God approved of my quote-unquote adulterous relationship with Brent Spiner. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 7:15. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. This verse is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, which is about marriage and God's laws for marriage in the church age. And God is saying here that if your husband or wife deserts you, if they leave, you are at peace. You can go off and marry somebody else if you want to. But in the passage, he encourages you not to be in a hurry to marry anybody, because he says if you marry somebody, you're going to have the cares of this world because you have to please your husband or your wife, and that adds extra stuff you have to think about. Instead, if you're single, you can be totally focused on serving Jesus, which is why I believe that the 144,000 Jewish missionaries in the tribulation are going to be virgin men, unmarried men. Probably because the tribulation period is going to be so challenging that anyone who's married is going to have a burden on them, an extra burden to think about, which would hinder them in the ministry. So it's actually better for God's spiritual leaders in the tribulation to be unmarried. And he's going to be using virgin Jewish men as the spiritual leaders in the future tribulation. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7 basically is encouraging you to stay where you're at, but God will allow for a divorce and remarriage in cases of death, desertion, or adultery. Death, I'm not going to go into because nobody has any problems with that. Everybody knows that if your husband or wife dies, it's not a sin to get remarried again, okay? So I'm not even going to go there. But I'm going to address some of the areas like desertion and adultery. Oh, I have allergies. I just read you the verse that says that if your husband or wife departs, you're saying, but it says unbelieving. But one thing I've noticed about the Bible when it comes to marriage, God doesn't seem to like to be clear-cut about this. And I think it's because he realizes that the sins committed inside of a marriage relationship can be complicated, and trying to judge who is right or wrong in that, it's kind of hard to just put that in black and white. I'm reading up to something. Let's go to Matthew 19:9. Okay, I've already explained that desertion is a reason that you can divorce and remarry. And I read you the passage there. Here's it says, but then God never encourages you to divorce. But, if they leave you and they're gone and they've remarried and gotten, you're free. You don't have to stay single for the rest of your life because your husband or wife left you, and you, and now you have nobody because they left you. If they've deserted you, you're free to go to somebody else. Let's go to Matthew 19:9. You might say, well, in that case, then you were the one who's wrong because you're the one who filed for divorce against your ex-husband and you left him. I'm leading up to something, okay? Let's go to Matthew 19:9. I actually had quite a lot of scruples about that. I had to deal with that a lot with the Lord before I could have peace about leaving my husband's, so to speak. Okay, let's go to Matthew 19:9. And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, that's adultery, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. Okay, that's another scriptural grounds for divorce and remarriage, is if your partner has committed adultery. Okay. You may say, well, then you were wrong to leave your ex. Okay, let's go on to some more passages here. 2 Samuel 12:8. This is about King David, my ancestor. I don't know why it is, but the devil and his people seem to love to use sexual sins or alleged sexual sins as a means to disqualify a man or a woman from the ministry. And I think the Lord's getting kind of sick of it. So I think he wants me to make this video. 2 Samuel 12:8. This is God explaining to King David why he judged him for his sin of adultery with Bathsheba. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives, plural. God's saying here, I let you have more than one wife, and it was fine, David. You may say, well, if that was fine, then why did God judge David for Bathsheba differently? That's what I'm going to. Into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite. Well, he was guilty of more than adultery. He was guilty of murder with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife. Okay, this is where he was judged. He wasn't judged because he had more than one wife, because at that time he already had several wives, and God wasn't judging him for all the wives he had. He had Abigail, and I think Michal, and then he had, they're listed up. He had like 10. And that was fine with God. He even says so here. He said, I gave you thy master's wives, plural. Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife. Okay, here's where God judges. I've noticed this. God considers it adultery when you steal somebody else's property and take it as your own. In this case, David stole Bathsheba from Uriah the Hittite, who was a good man, and that made it even worse. I mean, if Uriah was a creepy man, then maybe God might have been easier on David. Maybe he could say that David was trying to rescue Bathsheba from an evil man. But Bathsheba was married to a good man. So that made it even worse. Whenever you obtain a spouse through treachery, deceit, or stealing, you are judged. I've learned that from the Bible passages. And I think one of the reasons God may not be so crystal clear about what is sin in the marriage relationship is because he judges us not so much by our actions as by our motives. And a lot of people forget that. And the Jesuits always forget this. We are judged not for our actions, but our motives. If your motive is to be treacherous or to take what rightly belongs to someone else for yourself, and you know it's evil because you do it in secret, which is what David did with Bathsheba, you are judged in God's eyes. And this is where I came to peace with my relationship with Brent. Okay, let me go to some more Bible verses. Exodus 20:17. Okay, this is the law of marriage under the Jewish law, and that doesn't completely apply to the church age, but But it does sort of, because we're in a transition phase and we're going into the tribulation phase. And during the tribulation, the laws for marriage are going to be under the Jewish law again. So all this stuff I'm reading is going to apply to the future tribulation saints. Exodus 20:17. These are some of the laws for marriage under the law. And we are transitioning into that right now, which may be one of the reasons God doesn't have a problem with me having 40 men on my marriage list. 20:17. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Notice the context of the scripture. It's in terms of stealing. Nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. Okay? I mean, if it was wrong to have more than one wife, then why was it that God allowed Jacob to have Leah and Rachel, and Abraham had Sarah and Keturah, and David had many wives, Solomon had many wives, and God didn't condemn him until they started becoming treacherous in the way they obtained their wives. Then he condemned them. For instance, at the end of Solomon's reign, God said the reason Solomon fell was his wives drew away his heart. He had like 800 concubines. At this point, Solomon was becoming treacherous with his women. He was allowing them to draw him away from his worship of the true God. In fact, I believe that at this point, God might have liked it if Solomon divorced some of his wives who were encouraging him to go into false worship. But I'm not going to go there right now. This is getting really complicated. Okay, the main thing is this. I've noticed from my Bible study, and the reason I am at peace about my relationship with Brent is that my relationship with Brent is not based on treachery. It's based on a very high and big love that we have for each other. And I believe this is why God has approved of this relationship. Okay, let's go. Deuteronomy 5:21. I'm just reading you some Bible verses that show you that God judges sins in the sexual area based on treachery. And maybe that's why he doesn't always have clear-cut rules for how to judge. For instance, in order to determine, let me just read this, Deuteronomy 5:21. Deuteronomy 5:21. Neither shalt thou desire thy neighbor's wife, neither shalt thou covet thy neighbor's house, his field, or his manservant, or his maidservant, his ox, or his ass, or anything that is thy neighbor's. Stealing. Okay, I really believe that back in 1990 and 91, if I had gone to Brent back then, God would have judged me as being wrong, because I would have been treacherous back then. Even though my ex-husband was very bad towards me starting around 1996 and afterwards, in 1990 and 91, he wasn't bad enough towards me yet that he deserved for his wife to leave him. So at that point, when Brent propositioned me back in 90 and 91, if I had left him and gone to Brent, I think God would have judged me as being adulterous and in the wrong. Even though I didn't know it, but at that point, my husband was being replaced bit by bit with his Jesuit clone, but apparently the replacement was not advanced to the point yet where God felt I was justified to leave him. So it's kind of a touchy area. But I asked God, how would you judge a spouse who's got, let's say, a wife who's married to a man who wants to kill her? I mean, it's not adultery to leave in that situation. And I believe God understands when you're in a dangerous marriage and you need to get out, he's not going to judge you as adulterous if you need to get out to stay alive. And at the judgment seat of when that couple is judged, the way he's going to judge is, let's say the man says, well, I had a right to beat my wife because she was fooling around on me, blah, blah, blah. And the Lord will say, no, she wasn't. You just made all that up because you just were a mean, cruel person and you wanted to control her and therefore you beat her up. And I'm going to judge you for that. You're going to have I really believe that we will be judged by our motives. And I've noticed from reading the Bible that treachery inside the marriage relationship is where you're judged. And treachery can take many forms. Or treachery in any sexual act is where you're judged. For instance, let's take Lori McBride and Brent Spiner. She's alleging that that she's in the right because she's had sex with Brent Spiner, and therefore this makes her his wife. She said, well, Gail, according to your rules, I married him because I had sex with him. I said, yes, but rape is not marriage. I said, it has to be willing and knowing sex. Let's go to what God considers. You say, well, where did you get this, that flesh with flesh is marriage? Well, basically from Genesis. When God talks about the first marriage, here's what he says. Genesis chapter 2, verse 23. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. That's your first marriage ceremony right there. As you notice, there's no license, no ceremony. They were considered married because they were one flesh. So when they came together in the sexual union, and when they did it as an act of love and commitment toward each other, that was marriage. So I believe that's what it's got to be. Okay? Rape. I said, Lord, how do you feel about rape? He's kind of gray in this because in the Old Testament, if a woman was raped, God often ordered that man to marry her on the spot. So I guess he does consider that marriage in a way, but I don't think God would judge the one who was raped if they didn't want to marry their rapist. In other words, see, back in the Old Testament days, a woman was totally dependent on her husband for financial support. So in order to protect the woman, he had laws written so that the man would not behave treacherously against the woman. And I've noticed the theme throughout Scripture is what is wrong in a sexual relationship is whatever is treacherous. Okay? So that's what you got to keep in mind. You say, well, how would God deal with clones? We've got technology today where Jesuits are silently murdering the marriage partner and replacing them bit by bit with Jesuit clones. And I said, Lord, where in the Bible does it talk about this? And the Lord seemed to tell me, Gail, that's actually a type of a rape when you think about it. Because that marriage partner is forced against his will. Actually, it's a form of rape and murder. Because the Jesuits have cleverly murdered the original marriage partner and replaced them with a Jesuit clone. So I think when God judges that couple and in the next life, or whichever judgment they'll go to. If you're a Christian, you go to the judgment seat of Christ. If you're not a Christian, you're going to end up at the great white throne judgment. Oh, by the way, if you're a tribulation Christian, you don't go to the judgment seat of Christ. You go to, I believe, the great white throne judgment. I'm getting off into another subject here. The Bible can get really complex. I'm just trying to explain to you why I believe that God doesn't mind me having 40 men on my marriage list and why he does not judge me and Brent as adulterous, even though I have had brain-to-brain sex with about 6 or 7 of the 40. Okay, let's keep on going here. What other verses are there? Numbers 5:13. I'm reading you some scriptures to show principles of how God feels about sexual sins. He views it a little differently than the average person does. You got to remember, God judges by the heart, by the motives. Numbers 5:13. Numbers 5:13. Okay. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, if any man's wife go aside and commit a trespass against him, and a man lie with her carnally, and it be hid from the eyes of her husband. This seems to be a continuing theme with whenever a sexual sin is committed. It's always done in secret because they know they've done something wrong. And she be and hid from the eyes of her husband, and be kept close, and she be defiled, and there be no witness against her, neither she be taken with the manner, and the spirit of jealousy come upon him, and he be jealous of his wife, and she be defiled, or if the spirit, God actually had her swallow something, holy water in an earthen vessel. See, I think the reason the Lord did this is because he realizes that so many sexual sins are committed in secret, and the sinners are so clever in the way they cover up their sins that he's the only one who can judge this accurately. So here's what he said. He said, then shall the man bring his wife unto the priest, and he shall bring her offering for her in the 10th part of an ephah of barley meal, and he shall pour no oil upon it, nor put frankincense thereon, for it is an offering of jealousy. Here's what she has to do. And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord. See, the Lord's going to judge her. And the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and of the dust that is in the floor of the tabernacle, and the priest shall take and put it into the water, and the priest shall set the woman before the Lord, and uncover the woman's head, and put the offering of memorial in her hands, which is the jealousy offering. And the priest shall have in his hand the bitter water that causeth the curse. And the priest shall charge her by an oath, and say unto the woman, if no man have lain with thee, and if thou hast not gone aside to uncleanness with another instead of thy husband, be thou free from this bitter water that causeth the curse. But if thou hast gone aside to another instead of thy husband, and if thou be defiled, and some man have lain with thee beside thine husband, then the priest shall charge the woman with an oath of cursing. And the priest shall say unto the woman, the Lord make thee a curse and an oath among thy people, and when the Lord doth make thy thigh to rot, and thy belly to swell. And this water that causeth the curse shall go into thy bowels, to make thy belly to swell, and thy thigh to rot, and the woman shall say, Amen, amen. So in other words, the Lord had the woman swallow this water. And if her thigh swelled, and her belly swelled, or her thigh rotted and her belly swelled, that was the Lord saying, I judge her as guilty of adultery. She has betrayed and been treacherous against her husband. So, and I think this is going to come back again in the tribulation. For those who are serving God during the tribulation, when God tries to decide who has been unfaithful to their spouse, he's probably going to have them do this holy water stuff again. Because in the tribulation, the law is going to come back. And oh boy, I wonder how Laurie McBride would do under that, boy. I mean, this woman is so self-righteous and haughty and holy. She raped Brent Spiner to obtain marriage status, and then she goes to bed with about 10 or more other guys on the side. And she's accusing me of being treacherous? God Almighty is the judge. I can assure you that Jesus Christ has a very low opinion of Laurie McBride. Because he doesn't judge you by your actions alone. He judges you by your motives. She actually stole Brent Spiner from me, and then she went to bed with him through rape, drug rape. But because she took pictures of him and her actually having sex together, she thinks that proves that, that he had willing and knowing sex with her. Very clever Jesuit ruse. Hey, I'll tell you this, Jesuits. During the tribulation, you know how God's going to judge you? He's going to use the holy water on you, Laurie McBride. I wonder what happened to Laurie McBride if she swallowed that holy water. Oh, I bet her thigh would rot and her belly would swell. Oh, yeah, man. And God would say, guilty. I mean, you know what? During the courtroom, I had this actually on tape. She ran off to the court restroom and used brain control and switch out technology on an unsaved Brent Spiner so that the Jesuits were able to switch him out with his Jesuit clone so that only from his penis on up to his head was Brent, and then the arms, the legs, and the hips were his clone, and he was forced to have sex against his will with Laurie McBride in the courtroom. And I just really felt for him. I thought, oh, how terrible to have to go through that. I could imagine what it would be like. That was like rape, a form of mental rape, as well as physical rape. That must have been, can you imagine what it would be like to be forced to have sex with your murderer and rapist. And that's what happened to him. God will not judge Brent for that. And you know what she was doing? She was having sex with Brent Spiner and Zach Knight at the same time in the court bathroom. At the judgment seat, who do you think God's going to judge in that situation? You think he's going to judge Brent Spiner? Or is he going to judge Zach Knight and Laurie McBride for using brain control technology against Brent's will on him? And during this time, Brent and I were having regular brain-to-brain sex. His heart was with me. I just felt so bad for him. I knew God was not on her side. And I knew she used very clever Jesuit trickery. Remember this. You may say, well, according to the Bible, she just married him because she had sex with him. Yes, but God judges by motives. The way God judges who was treacherous in that situation. Was it Brent Spiner? No, he was the victim. It was Laurie McBride and Zach Knight. And they will be judged for their treachery. Basically, I'm finding that if you want to ask yourself if what you're doing is wrong in God's eyes, forget about your reputation. The Jesuits know how to trash your reputation. They pretty much trash mine with a lot of people. But I'm talking about your character. If you're really worried what God thinks about your sexual behavior, when you anticipate doing something sexual, ask yourself this question. Am I being treacherous in any way when I commit this act? If you can answer yes, then God will judge you as wrong. Because that's how he judges. When you go through the whole Old Testament and New Testament, that's the principle. So it isn't, when it comes to sexual sins, you really can't have black and white rules in regard to actions and behaviors. You really have to start going into motives. For instance, let's say you married a woman who was gorgeous when you married her. She was beautiful. She could have won a beauty contest, but she got fat on you. She gained some weight. Maybe she got an illness, cancer, and she didn't look like she did. And now you just don't find her sexually attractive. And there's this good-looking young woman down the road, you know, that you want to go to bed with, that she turns you on, and you want to dump this woman because she doesn't interest you sexually anymore. You're treacherous. God will judge you for that. Okay, let's turn it around. Let's do it this way. Let's say the woman let's say she's fat and she's ugly, and you've been married to her for 20 years, and all of a sudden you discover that she's trying to kill you. Okay, you've noticed she's been poisoning your food. And people might think you're crazy, but you know you're not imagining things and you're thinking, man, I need to get out of here because if I don't leave this marriage, she's going to kill me. So you leave to stay alive. And she goes and blabs to the whole world and makes up stories and said you had an affair with somebody that you didn't. And maybe she somehow got you in a compromising situation. She hired somebody to take pictures, which sounds like something a Jesuit woman would do. And she said, well, he left me because I was fat and ugly, and so therefore he's committed adultery, and I want to sue him, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So let's say he did leave her because he had to leave her to stay alive because she's trying to kill him. Outwardly, it appears like he left her. And let's say that 3 years later, he ends up marrying a woman who's good looking. And maybe she somehow got a picture of him and her together when they were married and he didn't know it, you know. And she goes out and tells everybody, hey, see, he committed adultery on me. They're him and her there together. Maybe she doctored up the picture to make it look like they were holding hands when they weren't. And she spreads it all around the neighborhood. Who's good? Who is God going to judge there? Who was the treacherous one? It was the fat wife, okay? Now she's going to, maybe she's a good actress and everybody goes on her side and thinks that she was innocent, but God knows what really happened, people. And this is the point I'm driving at, okay? Now you look at my life. Let me see, Malachi 2:15. Did I get all the Bible verses, Lord, here? God doesn't really have clear-cut rules on what's right and wrong in these situations because it's complicated and he knows it. I think he's trying to emphasize that he knows the heart. He judges treachery in relationships. If you're treacherous, you're wrong. 2:15 and 16, Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament. Malachi 2:15 and 16. Okay. It says, and did not he make one, yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one, that he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. See how God condemns treachery? For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garments, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. Okay. Brent and I were crazy about each other in 1990 and 91. Yet, despite that, because we didn't want to be treacherous, we kept our relationship only in correspondence, and that was it. It was a long-distance love affair. There was no physical adultery. We may have committed mental adultery, but I believe the Lord allowed that because my motive for retaining Brent was because I sensed greatness in him, and I wanted to nurture that greatness that I sensed in him as a man. I don't know, I just sensed back then that he was a great man, and I so admired his greatness. And this is what I told Brent when I wrote him back then. I said, Brent, I sense greatness in you. And I believe the Lord wants me to continue my relationship with you as a bosom friend, and I will love you in spirit and with my words and with my writings. And I believe this God will honor, because this is not treacherous. To have a love like ours, where our motive for communicating is to encourage the greatness in the other, I believe this God will honor. And you know what? He did honor it. He looked at my heart, and he looked at Brent Spiner's heart, and he said, there's no treachery there. They're actually denying themselves each other so that they won't degrade the high love they have down to a treacherous level. There's no treachery there, and all there is a great love, and I'm going to honor that love because there's no treachery there, and because they're going out of their way to make sure there's no treachery. And then the Lord looked at my husband, and he looked in his heart, and he said, I see a little bit of treachery there. He said, but it's not bad enough yet where Gail can leave him to go to Brent. And I think the Lord looked at my ex-husband's heart, and he said, you know what? There's some treachery there. There's some cruelty there that I don't like in how he's treating Gail. And I look at her heart, and she's aware that she's being emotionally abused, and yet in order to honor me and to make sure that there's no treachery in her love with Brent, she won't go to the man she adores and would die for. And the Lord said, I respect that. I'm going to make a way for her to go to Brent without treachery in the future. And he actually gave me I went to a funeral of a little girl and who died of brain cancer. This was at my church, and God spoke to me during that funeral. And he told me, Gail, what you're going through, the pain you've gone through, and having to deny yourself this man's love, and what he's gone through in loving you. This time I didn't know about the rape of what Laurie McBride did to Brent Spiner, and I have a whole a movie on that called Brent Spiner's Rape, which I encourage you to see because it'll show you what a great man Brent Spiner is, how awesome our love is, that we rose above that rape and did not allow it to destroy our love, which shows me that we had a love from heaven, because the average relationship would have been destroyed by it. God said, you know what? He said, you know what, Gail, what you and Brent, the pain that you and Brent have gone through to try to maintain your love, is your suffering has been as great or greater than that little girl who died of brain cancer. He said, I'm going to honor you. And when I came home from that's what he seemed to tell me when I heard the preacher give his message at that funeral. And when I came home, I put my radio, my CD player on random mode. And the first song that came up was, There's a place for us, somewhere a place for us, peace and quiet and open air waits for us someday. There's a time for us. Someday a time for us. And I claim that song as a promise for God, and that's why we play it in our church service. Well, that was 1992 when he gave me that promise. And I didn't even know then what had happened. This was right after Lori McBride raped Brent Spiner. But you know why God doesn't judge the love that Brent has for me? Because there's no treachery in this love. And our love is so high that it rose above the treachery of Lori McBride and the Jesuits. And as great, as horrific a crime as they committed against our love, they couldn't destroy it because the love came from God himself. And this is why I believe that God, I think God looked at me and said, you know what? And then in December 99, when God revealed to me that Lori McBride was a Vatican agent, and I completely forgave Brent for that. Just like that song, there's a way of forgiving, a way of forgiving. That's what happened. All I could think about was his pain. I thought, oh my goodness, he's loved me. And I remember how high our love was back in 1990 and 91. And I tried to capture that in my novel, Silver Skies. And I thought, when a love is this great, that even a horrific rape like Lori McBride did to Brent Spiner cannot destroy it, God will honor it. And I was right. And around December 99, when I realized that Lori McBride was a Vatican agent and that my ex-husband seemed to take her side on everything, I noticed that. The Lord spoke to me during my devotions. He said, Gail, now is the time to get out of that marriage. If you don't get out, you will be dead within a couple of years. And he said, I said, Lord, I want to marry Brent Spiner. And the Lord seemed to tell me, go ahead and let him know that you want to marry him. He didn't really tell me whether the marriage would happen or not, but he said it was okay for me to let him know. And that I proceeded to divorce my husband under divine orders. I really believe so. And I do believe that if I did not exit that marriage in 2001, that I would not be alive talking to you today. Now looking, I didn't know it at the time, but I was married to a clone of my husband, a Jesuit clone. I was married to a Jesuit. I could tell that he was on the side of the Jesuits in everything he did, and he was very treacherous. See what I mean? At the judgment, you know who's going to be judged? He's going to be judged because he was the treacherous one. God judges us based on who was the treacherous one. I was totally dependent on him for financial support, and he was cooperating with the Jesuits to destroy me. And the Lord knows that if I didn't get out of that marriage, he would have destroyed me. In fact, I believe he's the main reason I lost my job recently. He's still treacherous. He hasn't changed his ways. The Lord will judge him. He was the treacherous one. So if you're asking, and you know, Brent Spiner has just been ordained a pastor at Church of Gail, and some people are already getting on him saying, oh, he committed all these sexual sins. Not in God's eyes. Because, you know, in every single sexual sin that Lori McBride alleges he committed, who was the treacherous one during that? It was her, not him. And she is the one who will be judged, not Brent. And God looked at my heart and said, you know what? He said, that Gail, even though she was risking the streets to maintain her correspondence with Brent, and so that she could encourage him because she saw greatness in him, and even though he betrayed her physically by allowing this evil woman to live in her house, and she doesn't completely understand all the whys and wherefores of it, she has forgiven him totally for that. And all she can think about is the pain he went through because he had to endure this woman, and she's not even thinking about herself, how he betrayed her physically. God said, boy, that woman's got a really generous and forgiving heart. He says, I respect that. He says, I'm going to pay her back. And you know, he did. He said, you know what? She doesn't hold it against him one iota that he might have had sex with this evil woman, even though she realizes that it was against his will. And all she can think about now is to nurture him and marry him to heal him from the pain he suffered from her. And she doesn't hold it against him at all that he had her. God said, that woman has got a big heart. That's what I think he thought when he looked down at me. He said, I'm going to do something for her. He says, I know the world's going to think that she's a loose woman, but when a woman's got that big a forgiving heart towards this man who encouraged her to go against her deepest convictions about marriage, where, I really had hang-ups about maintaining my relationship with him. I thought I was committing adultery, and yet I could forgive Brent, even though I knew he might have gone to bed with Lori McBride, because I realized that it wasn't what he wanted, that she obtained it by treachery. So I never held it against him once I figured out she was a Vatican agent. And I totally forgave him. And I've never held it against him since I figured out she was a Vatican agent. So God looked at my heart and he saw and then Brent himself didn't hold it against me that I didn't understand why he had this woman and that I judged him so harshly. So he was equally big. And he maintained the relationship also to protect me, because she threatened to kill me if she didn't have girlfriend status with him. So part of his motive for having her was to protect me, and God saw that. So he thought, man, that man's put up with this trashy woman who's just tried to kill him to protect the woman he loves, and then she, Gail, has totally forgiven him for associating with this trashy woman. That love between this man and this woman is really unusual. Jesus said, I like this. And even later, the Lord tested the love again. And we had to endure separations. And then when Vladimir Putin came in, Brent Spiner was so big-hearted. He was just happy for me that he thought that maybe I found a man that I could be safe with. He wanted to marry me, but he knew that that I might be killed. So God just looked down, and he looked at the hearts of everybody involved. He said, Vladimir Putin, he really loves her, and she loves him. And they're working with me to fight the devil's people, the evil satanic Jesuit order. He said he looked at Brent Spiner and he looked at our hearts and he said, there's a great love there. There's a great love there. There's no treachery here. This is just all great love. Gail's feelings for Vladimir, Vladimir's feelings for Gail, Brent's feelings for Gail. And then when Matthew came in there was no treachery there. No betrayal. And same with Hugh Jackman. You might say, well, he betrayed his wife. Hugh Jackman's wife got killed and replaced with a clone. I think the treachery there was with the clone. Okay, so the thing is, when God judges sexual relationships or actions, he looks into the heart and he says, is there any treachery there? That's a biblical principle in both the Old and New Testament. The laws of marriage, the different religions have different interpretations of what is the proper and right reason for divorce. Like the Presbyterians might say this and this. The Methodists might believe this. The Baptists might believe this. And some, but I can give you one rule of thumb that you can use if you want to know what God thinks. Ask yourself, is there treachery in here? Whenever there's treachery, you're usually violating a biblical principle. That's where God judges. And so God sees the 40 guys on my marriage list, okay? From what I understand, we're still revamping that list. It's fluid. It changes. And I've only had brain-to-brain sex with about 6 or 7 of them. And it's been brief, and 96% of it is with Brent. And I only go to them because Brent wants me to, because my loving brain-to-brain with them encourages them. So there's no treachery there. So it's okay with God. And that's why God didn't mind David's wives except for Bathsheba. There's no treachery there. When treachery comes into the relationship, then God judges. Now, when you look at it that way, I think Lori McBride and Zach Knight, they're going to have a really hard time at the judgment, because just about every sexual act they commit is treacherous, where an innocent or a good person is being hurt by their actions. So you said, any of you want to say that Brent Spiner is not qualified for the ministry because of his sexual behavior in the past or presently? You got to look at it the way God looks at it. Brent Spiner's sexual actions since he fell in love have never been treacherous. They've all been done with a heart full of love and forgiveness and generosity. And if they have been treacherous, it was because his mind and will were raped by the treacherous Jesuit order. So it's a biblical principle. You're judged for your sexual actions, not just on the actions alone, but why you did them. And I am a firm believer. And Jesus himself told me, he said, your marriage list is cool with me, Gail. I don't have a problem with it. And he wouldn't really tell me why, but I think I know why. It's because there's no treachery there. Just a great love between us. When treachery, and besides that, we are leaving the church age and we're going into the Jewish dispensation. Under the law, it's okay for certain people to have more than one spouse. Look at King David. Look at Solomon. And they didn't commit sin against it. I read you the verses already where God said he even told David, I gave you wives, plural. He allowed him to have more than one wife. It was when treachery got in there that it was sin. With Bathsheba, there was treachery, so that was wrong. And God judged David severely for Bathsheba. He paid for that with having his own son Amnon rape Tamar, and then and then he had to watch his own son Absalom being killed. That was his punishment for sinning with Bathsheba, and the sin of murder because he murdered Uriah the Hittite, her husband. What was wrong with that was there was treachery involved. Okay, so and be very careful when you go to crazygail.com. That is Zach Knight's website. I've noticed when I go in there, I can almost feel like there's he's got some sort of brain control technology on there where I start doubting the goodness of God and I start doubting the promises in the Bible. There's something evil about that website, man. Be really careful. And I'm more resistant to the devil's wiles because of my genetic profile than others are. So if you got to visit crazygail.com, be aware that I think that's a demon-possessed website. And if you go in there and read that, I think you're putting your mind at danger of Jesuit brain control technology. So just be very careful. It's a dangerous website, and it's full of clever satanic lies. The best lies are 95% truth with 5% lie, which is the tactic that evil Jesuit Antichrist Zach Knight uses. But don't listen to his crap when he says that Brent Spiner is not qualified for the ministry because of his sexual sins. When God looks at Brent, he sees no treachery there. And that's how God judges, folks. He looks at the heart. It isn't what you did, it's why you did it. And that's how we're judged. If there's treachery there, you're guilty, even if the whole world thinks you're innocent.